There are songs that don't just live in the ears of music lovers, they become etched into the fabric of popular culture. With I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, Lynn Anderson didn't just sing a beautiful melody, she gave voice to a life philosophy, that the world promises nothing, yet we can still find beauty in what remains. From a little girl riding horses across the California plains to the queen of country music gracing national television, Lynn Anderson carried with her both the American dream and its darker shadows. She once stood atop the charts with genre-defying hits, won a Grammy, and found international fame. But she also spiraled into addiction, faced arrests, endured 2 broken marriages, and met a sorrowful end in the heat of a Nashville summer. Her life stands as a poignant reminder of a harsh truth. Not everyone who cultivates a rose garden gets to walk through it in peace. Today, we step into Lynn Anderson's rose garden, to understand a woman who sang of promises never made, yet left behind a musical legacy that will never fade. Early life. Before stepping onto the stages of Nashville, Lynn Anderson lived in an entirely different world, one where saddles, the scent of fresh grass, and the sound of galloping hooves were more familiar than any microphone. Lynn Renee Anderson was born on September 26, 1947 in Grand Forks, North Dakota, a place in the rugged Midwest where freedom came hand in hand with hardship. Her grandparents were Scandinavian immigrants who came to America seeking a new beginning, building a family deeply rooted in nature, horses, and cowboy tradition. Before she could walk steadily, Lynn was already riding horses. As she would later admit, "I was riding before I could run." Her childhood wasn't without challenges, but it forged in her a steel-like discipline and an unrelenting competitive spirit, qualities that would later help her survive in the turbulent world of country music. While she was still young, her family relocated to California, first to the suburbs of Pleasant Oaks and later to Sacramento. But city life never dulled Lynn's passion for the countryside. She persistently begged her parents to move to a real ranch, someplace with open pastures, horse stables, and room to ride freely. Eventually, that dream came true. Her family purchased a 2-acre ranch in Sacramento, where Lynn lived, breathed, and grew up alongside horses she considered her closest companions. By the age of 9, she was already competing professionally and won second place at a major horse riding event in San Francisco. Within California's junior equestrian circles, Lynn Anderson stood out, not just for her talent, but for her unmatched drive and fierce dedication. But alongside her love of horseback riding, another fire quietly smoldered: music. Both her parents, especially her mother Liz Anderson, were music lovers and amateur songwriters. Their home often echoed with the strumming of guitars and the raw voices of visiting country musicians. In this environment, Lynn didn't just listen. She learned to love music that breathed with the dust of the land and the rhythm of real life: country. By her teenage years, Lynn was no longer just a horse girl. She was a young woman beginning to seek opportunities in radio and recording. She landed a job as a secretary at KRAK Radio in Sacramento, a small but pivotal step that brought her closer to audio production, broadcasting, and the creative community. And there, something within her began to shift. She was still California's horseback queen, but the glow of the microphone had started to outshine the sunlight by the stables. A new chapter was forming. Ahead of her lay a debut recording and a rose garden waiting to be born. Early career. For Lynn Anderson, music didn't begin with a contract or an award. It began in the shadow of her mother. Liz Anderson, Lynn's mother, was not only the backbone of the family, but a quiet lyric poet hidden in the folds of everyday life. While traveling with her daughter to horseback competitions, Liz would continue writing songs, patiently mailing her lyrics to record labels in Los Angeles and Nashville. She believed music could open a new door. And in 1964, that door opened wide. When Merle Haggard recorded her song, "My Friends Are Gonna Be Strangers," turning it into a hit. That unexpected success drew the Anderson family toward Nashville. A scouting trip was arranged in 1965, intended more as an experiment than a career move. But in an intimate sing-along at a hotel, Lynn Anderson, the young girl accompanying her mother, stepped out of Liz's shadow and stunned the room into silence. One of the people in that room was Slim Williamson, an experienced producer. He wasn't just captivated by Lynn's clear, youthful voice. He saw something rare: stage instinct. Lynn wasn't merely the daughter of a songwriter, she was a star waiting to be lit. In 1966, at just 19 years old, Lynn Anderson signed her first recording contract with Chart Records, a small label with big ambitions. During a car ride with her mother, Liz casually sang the phrase, "Ride, ride, ride," and Lynn instantly knew it would be the song to launch her career. She chose it for her debut recording, not because someone told her to, but because she wanted it that way. "Ride, Ride, Ride" quickly made its way onto country radio and entered the Billboard charts. It wasn't a massive hit, but it was enough to make people remember the name Lynn Anderson. A bright, strong voice with a touch of innocence, a rare combination at a time when country music was still steeped in old-school conservatism. Shortly after, she released "If I Kiss You, Will You Go Away?", another of her mother's compositions. The song unexpectedly hit the Billboard Country Top 5 in 1967, paving the way for her debut album to break into the top 25. Lynn Anderson was no longer just a rising act. She was now a serious contender among a new generation of female country artists. In 1968, she released "Promises, Promises," propelling the album of the same name to #1 on the country album charts. What Liz Anderson wrote from the heart, Lynn sang with her soul, and America began listening closely. Not just because the songs were catchy, but because behind them was the voice of a young woman slowly breaking free of a shadow, stepping onto her own stage. Critics, from AllMusic to Billboard, began to take notice. They praised her freshness, her savvy song choices, and her ability to deliver performances that were both raw and refined. Her covers of songs like "Ring of Fire" and "Honey" proved she wasn't just a lucky voice. She was an artist actively shaping her identity in an industry that rarely made room for women. But the true breakthrough hadn't come yet. Everything up to that point had been a warm-up, because just ahead, waiting for Lynn Anderson, was a garden, a rose garden, and the promise that nothing would ever be the same again. Career success. In 1970, as waves of cultural upheaval swept across America, from war and women's liberation to the rise of new musical movements, one woman stood quietly in the heart of Nashville and seized a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Lynn Anderson would go on to achieve something unprecedented in country music history, to touch the hearts of the world with a song that promised nothing at all. At the time, Anderson had just signed with Columbia Records, a major turning point, not only in terms of label, but in mindset. She was no longer content with simply being an up-and-coming artist. She wanted to become an icon. Her husband, Glenn Sutton, also her producer, helped usher her into her first recordings under the label. But it was Lynn herself who would create the magic. While listening to an album by Joe South, she paused at the track "I Never Promised You a Rose Garden." There was something in that melody that she couldn't shake, a blend of hope and disillusionment, of beauty and brutal truth. When she brought the song into the studio, Sutton objected. He believed the lyrics were too masculine, unfit for a female voice. But Lynn didn't back down. She insisted on recording it in multiple sessions, and finally, he relented. The single was released in October 1970, and it took the music world by storm. Rose Garden held the number, one spot on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart for 5 consecutive weeks. But what no one could have predicted was this: it crossed genres and reached number 1. 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, something nearly unheard of for a female country artist at the time. In under 3 months, the name Lynn Anderson became a global sensation. And not just in America. In the UK, Canada, Germany, Australia, South Africa, the song climbed into the top 5. A voice born in the horse-riding fields of California was now echoing in Paris cafes and on grand European stages. In 1971, Rose Garden won the Grammy for Best Female Country Vocal Performance and was honored by both the Country Music Association and the Academy of Country Music, ACM. That success wasn't just about chart positions or sales, it shattered a boundary. Until then, country music was often labeled as regional, steeped in Southern tradition and rarely accepted into the mainstream. With her confident stage presence, accessible country pop sound, and modern image, Lynn Anderson paved the way for future generations of female country stars, from Shania Twain to Carrie Underwood, to push the genre onto a bigger, broader map. In December 1970, the Rose Garden album was released and immediately soared to number 1. 1 on the Billboard Country Albums chart, where it remained for an astonishing 77 weeks, over a year and a half. It also broke into the Billboard 200 at number 19, the highest album placement of Anderson's career and one of the most impressive feats for any female country artist of the decade. The album would go on to be certified platinum by the RIAA, far exceeding expectations in sales. In 1971, Anderson continued her momentum with 2 more number 1 singles, 1 country hits, You're My Man and How Can I Unlove You. Both exemplified the unique musical identity she was forging, a voice rich in emotion, stories told with plain-spoken clarity and polished production that flirted with pop without losing its country core. That blend, straddling the line between pure country and mainstream pop, made Lynn Anderson a singular force. She didn't choose sides. She walked the tightrope confidently, as a pioneer. At a time when Nashville was still hesitant, she pushed country music far beyond its familiar borders. By the end of 1971, she wasn't just a musical star, she had become a cultural icon, a woman bold enough to bring the world a rose garden, even while knowing life never promised one. But behind that soaring voice was a soul beginning to tire. Success that came too big, too fast, often doesn't leave room to pause and breathe. And as the bright light of Rose Garden began to dim, shadows quietly started to gather, not from the audience, but from within herself. Controversy and tragedy. Success that arrives too quickly isn't always a reward. Sometimes, it's a warning. And for Lynn Anderson, From 1972 onward, the road began to slope downward, subtly and gradually, like a crack creeping across the wall of fame. Following the massive success of Rose Garden, Lynn released a string of hits like Cry, Fool Me, Keep Me in Mind, and Top of the World. She remained a chart-topping artist throughout the early 1970s. But for those paying close attention, something had changed. The sparkle in her eyes on stage had dimmed. Something was quietly draining her from within. Behind the scenes, her marriage to producer Glenn Sutton, the man who had helped her shape Rose Garden, was unraveling. Though they had once shared both creative and romantic highs, Lynn later revealed that Sutton had exerted excessive control over her career, sometimes blocking major opportunities. He refused to let her join Bob Hope's legendary tour to Vietnam and declined film offers like WW and the Dixie Dance Kings. Despite continuing to collaborate professionally, their relationship grew cold and strained. By 1977, they divorced. At the same time, the pressure to maintain her place in the ever-evolving music industry wore her down. With new artists rising and public taste shifting rapidly, Lynn, who had risen through humble homegrown recordings, began to feel alienated from the very stages she once lit up. In 1978, she entered a second marriage with Texas businessman Harold "Spook" Stream, a man she met through a horse riding event. But this new union proved even more fragile. She later accused him of violence, attempting to run her over with a car, raising his hand to strike her, and keeping her in constant fear. They divorced in 1982. But the deepest wound came when she lost custody of her two children, a heartbreak that never healed for a woman who had always placed family at the center of her life. Music, once her refuge, no longer felt like a sanctuary. Columbia Records dropped her. Her new releases failed to chart as before. The 1980 album, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, marked a sharp decline. Lynn Anderson didn't vanish. She still sang, still rode horses. But she no longer sang for the charts. She sang for those who stayed, for a loyal group of fans who understood that behind the makeup was a soul weathered by time and pain. And then came the darkness. From the late 1990s, Lynn began to fade from mainstream stages, but her name reappeared, this time in police reports. In December 2004, she was arrested for driving under the influence in Denton, Texas. A witness called police after seeing her car swerve erratically. After failing a sobriety test, she was jailed and released on $11,000 bail. The headlines were harsh. "Has the Rose Garden wilted?" they asked. Just a month later, in January 2005, she was again in the news, this time for shoplifting a Harry Potter DVD at a New Mexico store. When police arrived, Lynn, in a visibly unstable state, resisted arrest and allegedly assaulted an officer. The incident became a scandal across the country music world. Once the epitome of grace and femininity, she was now portrayed in the press as a fallen star spiraling out of control. Although the assault charge was eventually dropped and the theft dismissed on condition of no further offenses, the damage was done. Critics who once hailed her as country pop's perfect crossover voice fell silent. Some TV shows stopped inviting her. Even fellow musicians were reluctant to defend her publicly. In May 2006, she was arrested again for DUI after causing a minor crash in New Mexico. She refused a breathalyzer and was jailed for a third time. The most disheartening event came on September 11, 2014, when she caused another minor accident in Nashville. She admitted to drinking and taking prescription medication. Though she apologized publicly and entered treatment at the Betty Ford Center, the glamorous image of Lynn on horseback in 1970s TV specials now seemed like a distant memory. Debate erupted. Should she still be called a legend? Some said, "A star shouldn't fall so many times." Others countered, "Lynn Anderson was human, not a stage angel. Her stumbles only made her voice feel more real." The truth is, personal scandals robbed her of a chance at full career revival. Record labels backed away. The press doubted her. At one point, even radio stations briefly blacklisted her classic hits. And the bitterness from her divorces, especially the loss of her children in the second, invited cruel criticism. Some said losing custody was the price of a chaotic life. But one thing deserves to be said clearly. Lynn Anderson never stopped fighting. Even as her public image crumbled, she quietly continued performing at local fairs, fundraising for disabled children, and competing in charity horse events. To those who met her off stage, she wasn't a fallen diva. She was a woman struggling for redemption, trying not to be buried by the very legend she had built. Scandal didn't erase what Lynn Anderson did for country music, but it did change how the world saw her, not with awe, but with something deeper, empathy. And if one day someone asks, was Lynn Anderson truly a great artist? The answer may not lie in her downfall, but in the words she once sang. "You better look before you leap. Still waters run deep." Because everyone has quiet waters with storms beneath, even those who once gave the world a rose garden. Personal life. In the entertainment world, where love is often treated like a performance and family happiness reduced to promotional imagery, Lynn Anderson stood as proof of the opposite. The more authentically one lives, the more vulnerable one becomes. Her first marriage to Glenn Sutton, both husband and music producer, seemed at first to unite two harmonious worlds, art and life. They married in 1968 just as Lynn turned 21 and stood at the threshold of stardom. For nearly a decade, they built a country pop empire together. He handled the arrangements, she brought the voice that touched millions. They had a daughter, Lisa Sutton, who would later become a songwriter herself. But over time, fame began to distort their relationship. Lynn once shared that Sutton exerted significant control over her career, even blocking major opportunities for fear of losing influence. After their 1977 divorce, she entered a new chapter, one filled with more turbulence and deeper wounds. Her second marriage, to Texas businessman Harold "Spook" Stream, initially felt like a breath of fresh air. He came not from the studio, but from a horse-riding event, a place where her personal passions were most alive. But their union quickly turned toxic. Lynn publicly accused him of violence, even claiming he tried to hit her with a car. When the marriage ended in 1982, the most painful blow followed. She lost custody of their two children. No news report could capture that kind of anguish. No song could express the price an artist mother had to pay. And yet, through that pain, Lynn found another kind of love. Quieter, steadier. It was with songwriter Mentor Williams, whom she'd met in Nashville years earlier but didn't grow close to until the late 1980s. They never married, but they lived together for more than 20 years on a peaceful ranch in New Mexico. She once said, "He's my boyfriend, but really more like a husband. No rings, no papers, just living together and trusting each other." In a world obsessed with glamorous relationships and scandalous splits, this quiet, unadorned love became her final refuge. Lynn was never the kind of artist who clung to fame. On stage, she could dazzle in the spotlight, but off stage, she chose to live among horses and nature, grounded in simplicity. She often shared, "I was riding horses before I could walk. Competitions, training ponies. That's where I feel most like myself." When she wasn't touring, she spent time in equestrian competitions, teaching disabled children to ride and engaging in charity work. For her, glory wasn't on stage. It was in bringing hope to someone, whether through a song or a day on the farm. Friendship also mattered deeply to Lynn Anderson, more than any spotlight. She didn't have many close friends in showbiz, but she earned the respect of those who worked with her. Figures like Brenda Lee, Dolly Parton, and Loretta Lynn spoke of her as someone both strong and fragile. They didn't just mourn the loss of a voice, they mourned the loss of a friend who never got the healing she deserved. Toward the end of her life, after all the scandals, losses, and efforts to reclaim her place, Lynn no longer talked about trophies or accolades. She talked about peace, about riding horses at dawn, about how it felt to step into a studio, not to chase a hit, but just to be herself. She once said, "I don't regret walking onto the stage, but if I could choose again, I'd want more time off of it." And perhaps in her final moments in Nashville, when she passed from this life after a heart attack, Lynn Anderson carried only one thing with her. Not a Grammy, not a chart position, but the memory of quiet mornings on the ranch, where her voice rose not for anyone else, but simply for herself. Legacy and influence. Though her career was interrupted by tragic turns, Lynn Anderson left behind an undeniable legacy in the evolution of modern country music. When Rose Garden bloomed in 1970, it wasn't just a timeless hit. It marked a breakthrough for a female artist who dared to step beyond the confines of tradition. At a time when country music remained insular, male-dominated, and steeped in conservative rural identity, Lynn introduced a new sound, soft yet strong, feminine yet powerful, accessible yet never simplistic. With hits like "You're My Man," "How Can I Unlove You, Cry, and Top of the World," Anderson became one of the pioneering women to infuse pop sensibilities into country music, a foundation for the country pop explosion that would follow. Artists like Carrie Underwood, Shania Twain, and Taylor Swift, each with their own unique voice, nonetheless walked paths that Lynn helped to pave. Her voice, rich, bright, unmistakably feminine yet full of strength, was once described by critics as a bridge between tradition and modernity. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need elaborate stage effects. All she needed was a strong melody, honest lyrics, and an unshakable belief in the healing power of music. That's why Rose Garden became more than just a song. It became a symbol, an unspoken anthem for those who once believed in the impossible and somehow survived to tell the tale. In terms of accolades, Lynn Anderson was the first female country artist to win the Grammy for Best Female Country Vocal Performance in 1971, beating out legendary contenders. She also earned awards from the Country Music Association, CMA, the Academy of Country Music, ACM, and secured dozens of Billboard chart entries in both country and pop categories, an extraordinary feat for a woman in her era. To music lovers, Lynn was the voice of a generation. To artists who followed, she was a model of courage in the face of bias. To equestrian and philanthropic communities, she was a woman who gave her heart to disadvantaged children, to people with disabilities, and to causes that needed a voice. Few people know that after her career declined, she devoted much of her time to equine therapy programs for people with depression and children with autism, because she believed music wasn't the only way to heal. And when she passed in 2018, Nashville's Woodlawn Cemetery, final resting place of icons like Tammy Wynette, George Jones, and Porter Wagoner, set aside a special corner to plant more than 200 Lynn Anderson hybrid roses. No statue, no museum. Just a quiet garden in the heart of Music City, where visitors can come, sit in silence, and remember a voice that once made the whole world skip a beat. Because a true legacy isn't measured by how many times you top the charts, but by how many people still remember you, still want to hear your voice, even when no one is asking you to sing anymore. From a little girl riding horses in California to the woman who carried a country voice across the world with a love song that promised nothing, Lynn Anderson proved one thing. You don't need a perfect life to become a legend. All it takes is a voice that rings true and a heart that never stops loving music, no matter how many times life tries to break it. Rose Garden wasn't just a song. It was a gentle confession that life comes with thorns. But if you dare to walk through them, the flowers will still bloom. And Lynn Anderson, though lost at times, though she fell, left us a garden just like that. If you've ever listened to Rose Garden and felt comforted on your driest days, share that in the comments below. And if you believe that artists like Lynn Anderson, not perfect, but deeply sincere, deserve to be remembered, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Do you remember where you were the first time you heard her voice? Tell us. Because music doesn't just live in the past, it lives in the memories we carry.